Hello, and welcome to our seventh episode of The Change Setters, the podcast where we explore the ever evolving landscape of change management through the voices of experienced practitioners. Today, we have here with us Mariebelle Malo and Laurent Edin. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for having us.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. Um, Let me explain to the audience who we have here with us. I'm going to read a short bio because there's a lot to say about you guys. I don't want to get this wrong. So let's start with Laurent. Laurent, you are the founder of Transform, a boutique consultancy specialized in business and digital transformation, with a focus on helping organizations drive change through a human-centric approach. We love that. That's all about change management. You're originally from France, but you've worked across Europe and most of the Southeast Asia in various regions and global roles, spanning management consulting, FMCG, retail, and technology. Serving customers globally from Sweden, his focus is on digital change, digital transformation, capability building, and supply chain transformation. And you're a regular contributor to the Skills channel and a top change management voice on LinkedIn. So grateful to have you here. Thank you so much, Laurent.
I'm super excited and thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Then we've got Mariebelle Malo. You are a senior change manager with a strong purpose to create more productive and meaningful organizations. She has a diverse background in sales, in communication, and in marketing research. And that really helps her to bring a more human-centered, but also practical and fact-based approach to change. In terms of change, you have extensive experience in implementing organizational change, agile ways of working, and AI digital transformation across different industries. Wow. And you're originally from Canada and you're based in Australia. By the way, it is pretty late in Australia right now. So thank you again for taking the time to be here with us. And she runs her own business called Change Architect. So welcome, Mariebelle.
Thank you.
Honestly, it's so cool to have all these different personalities and all this experience on the podcast. And I really, really hope that this podcast helps everyone who's listening, and implementing change where they are. So I think, honestly, I love asking this next question, which is all about what kind of books and podcasts you're into, because sometimes you're looking into, change content and you can kind of get lost in all the material that's out there. So what would you recommend, Laurent? What are you into at the moment?
So currently I am reading You're Invited by John Levy, which is about the art of influencing, which is a rather important topic when you're actually a change management practitioner, especially when you have to add a layer of the cultural diversity on top of it. So really exciting. I got a chance to meet him at an event in Stockholm a couple of months back. So I would recommend it too as a good read.
Cool. Wow, cool. Our last episode, episode 6, I'm going to say this for our audience, we focused on culture and how to take into account culture in our change plan, in our change management strategy. So if you want to go deeper into culture, you can listen to our 6th episode. Thank you, Laurent. Awesome. What about you, Mariebelle? Is there anything that you're into right now?
Yes, I'm reading the Rethink from Adam Grant, quite a popular book, I think, at the moment, and I love it. Highly recommended from a personal level, especially because it gets you just thinking differently, how to think like a scientist and in all sorts of ways, loads of examples and research in it. So very, very interesting. So I'm reading that one. And I have a podcast on, not podcast, sorry, but a audio book that I read, that I listen to, the Humanocracy from Gary Hamel. So I'm very much deep into implementing Agile at the moment. And that's one that is very much about that, but also decentralizing organization and decision-making organization. So very interesting, a bit more dry type of a book. So it's good to listen to this one, I have to say.
Yeah. Awesome. That's so cool. Thank you very much, Mariebelle. All right, let's get into the topic of today. So we will be, of course, talking about change management. This is what this podcast is about, and we're going to focus on the difference between local change management and global change management. But before we go into that, I wanted to get some of your insights, Maribel. What's your view and your philosophy on change management?
For me, it's very much about creating change from within. So it's all about creating that coalition, these champions that will help us drive the change, but also having that feedback loop to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing. From all the different change projects that I've done, having these champions was the key. Was really the one big factor that made it work and make it successful, because you could very quickly sense if things were not working. They could give you the feedback and you could adjust. So that would be my big thing about change management. There's a lot of other things, but if you have to pick one, I would say that would be it.
Makes sense. And you call them like champions, ambassadors, right? I still
Yeah, they decide, because you bring them together. Like then what's their preference? Champions, agents, coalition. There's all different names, but at the end of the day, these are the people. If you think about the bell curve, you need to have at least 15 to 20% of the people to be convinced in the business, and then the rest will follow. So these are the people we try to get. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And so, how do you do change management on a local level? I can imagine this coalition is going to be key for you when you've got, a top-down kind of change management approach, and we'll talk about the top in a second. But how do you do change management on a local level?
100%. That is the one of the big difference in understanding the needs of the key stakeholders that we have. So you would have a representation from these I'll call them agents across of the users, and you can again listen to them, and then you can start drafting your plan with their help as well. And that's the difference, is through that the customizations and understanding the local needs versus the global version, which often are templates and sort of not copy cut, but they have these plans, but you definitely have to massage them and make them work. Like they might come with a why, but that why would not be quite the right one for the local team. So you have to change that. You have to change the language, make it relevant to them. So a lot of it is just not just the plan, but the communication, understanding what will make them tick and make them understand what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So, what has your experience been in? Let's talk about these champions, right? What has your experience been in selecting these champions? Does Global give you a directive, or do you prefer to let local people do the way things the way they want?
Mhm. So normally they should be selected, I think, locally. It's more about, okay, the change will be, who will be impacted by the change. And then from there, picking the people is really to discuss with. Normally you go with the leadership team and see
Yeah,
who's in your team have influence. They don't have to be leaders, and especially they have leadership skills, but they're not necessarily leaders. They actually more actually in the operations. They're living the change, but
yeah.
they can help the rest of the team to understand what that means, help them through the journey. So they need to be selected very carefully,
Mm-hmm.
and then brought together. And then you need to help them through the journey and be always a step ahead of the rest of the team. So it could be additional trainings, but it's a lot about, as I said, the feedback loop and get their reviews as well. So they really feel part of it. So
Mm-hmm.
it couldn't be done from a global perspective. I think the global
Yeah.
can just tell you who will be impacted, and then from there you pick the people and you ensure that you get their time. That's really important to negotiate, making sure they have the proper time to help as well. Yeah.
Yeah. We follow the ProSci methodology quite a bit, and what
Mhm.
I love about ProSci is they do constant research, and recently they came out with a research saying that the best sort of champions are middle managers. Do you see
Mhm.
that as being true in your experience?
Not always. What they're trying to say is that they're not the top leaders. They're not necessarily like the ones above. They actually more middle management. But a lot of the champions I had were not necessarily people leaders. They're not necessarily line managers or have people reporting to them, but
Mm.
they just had this growth mindset. I know it's very it's a growth mindset, but it's true. They just were curious. They
Yeah.
wanted to be part of it. They had this energy. They were keen, and they just had this level of influence. People liked them. They were
Yeah.
personable. People like to enjoy working with them. So automatically, if they were part of this project, people are more curious and makes it automatically a bit more positive.
Yeah. That's what makes it harder from a global perspective because you don't have that feel, right? So you really need a local perspective on, yeah, on the recruitment of these special agents.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Yes.
And so, tell us more about how you manage change from a global macro level, Laurent, because I can imagine it's not always, as easy and cookie cut as we can imagine it to be.
It isn't, but I think it's important to emphasize the point that one cannot go without the other. Okay,
Mm,
so having a really quality, strong change lead in the market is actually the critical success factor.
Mm.
And I always start from a point of empathy because some markets will have those capabilities and some will not, and that's just going to be a very, very different journey. So I think seeking to understand first of all the level of capabilities locally. I've had the fortune to work with Mariebelle for the Australia New Zealand market. She was very experienced, so the conversation was completely different to other markets where I
Mm.
almost had to actually train people and upskill people who did not have actually that level of capability. So
Mhm.
that's the first step. The second one is obviously also to be very acutely aware of the cultural differences. So,
Mm.
like Mariebelle rightly said, often, the top-down approach from global, which is here is the plan, here is something generic, those are the activities and milestones you need to follow, is purely a guideline. Okay, so can people actually relate to it? But most importantly, can they translate this is something that is meaningful and impactful for the local people?
Yeah.
Change for you at a global level might mean something completely different for somebody sitting in another culture. So really understanding the cultural nuances and making sure these are actually translated properly is really paramount. There is often, I would say, a thought that change management is mostly about communication and engagement. Okay, it is, but there's a lot more to this. Okay, so having this person that's really anchor point that we're talking about, who is able to relay some of those global practices or sharing from other markets, but also adapt it and translate it to something both meaningful and impactful in a local environment is super important.
100%. And how do you make sure that everyone's following, maybe not consistently, the plan because you want to give the locals flexibility, but how do you follow through? What's your experience there?
So I think it's a mix of trust, delegation, but also transparency, and this is where technology is a fabulous enabler.
Mm.
So I'm never been in the camp of micromanagement. You have to trust people, but also making sure that if they do need support, they do need help they can call upon, but also they have actually access to what either other markets are doing or good practices that are available out there. And tech has been is often a huge enabler to do this. Not only
Mm.
does it help you to bring that transparency across the governance, also access to that can be documentation, that can be recordings, um, but also a way of actually sharing across the different markets. And I think
Mm.
when it comes to tech, you need to be very careful to choose, to know what to choose and when to choose it. So
Yeah.
I'll give you a clear example to illustrate that point. If we look at the Microsoft, yeah, sorry.
No, no, go
If
ahead,
we
go
look
ahead.
look at the Microsoft environment, most people are used to work with Teams, for example, and that's often what I would call something that is used within a project environment with a limited amount of people. So it's called a little bit the inner loop. When it comes to building global capabilities or communities of practice, for example, when you want to really uplift those ambassadors, those change agents, Yammer, for example, is actually a very good tool where you can post testimonials. You can
Mm.
also try to showcase what some of the local markets are actually doing to a global audience. And that does also help drive this engagement. There's a little bit of element of pride as well, but I think it's also a great way to bring visibility to some of the work that those local anchor points are actually doing with their teams.
I love that. I did one, well, a few, but one recent here. It was a global change management rollout for a data platform, and we used gamification to kind of build competitivity amongst the different regions. And I'm telling you, it works. It's kind of reverse psychology, you know, focusing on those regions that are actually onboarded, who are adopting, you know, the new platform or whatever it will be, and it really works.
I think
So if
it's
there's
a
anyone
great
struggling,
example to drive adoptions. Absolutely.
and do you guys have experience with gamification on a global level? Is that something that you guys do or have done?
I've touched a little bit on it with, I think it was a startup in Israel at the time. They had done some work for a client before, so not something on a large scale, but to really understand the concept, what was possible and not possible as well. But to keep it as simple, and as you said, you know, having this also this reward mechanism to actually drive those levels of dopamines in the market and actually, you know, have that competitive edge, I think is a really good example to help you drive those adoption levels. So on a small scale.
Yeah. I've one additional question on global versus local change management, and the question stems from one issue that I've stumbled upon in the past, which is managing sponsorship and stakeholders. You know, so global generally has an idea of where they want to go, of how they want things to look, you know, what good looks like. They have an idea of that. Then how do you kind of make sure that you have the right sponsorship locally to make sure that the vision is passed through? So of course we have our champions, right? But how do you kind of manage more senior sponsorship? Do you have any experience, any examples to share with the audience?
I think one vehicle is definitely through your call change champion. It also depends the level of clout that they have in relationship with the sponsors or the leadership team. Another one is to actually have direct one-on-one conversations with those leaders and really explain again, you know, or re-emphasize the why, and also try to seek some local insights from them to actually, you know, as a guidance to be able to coach the process forward into their market, because it is in their interest for this to succeed as well.
Yeah.
I would
Anything
say,
you
like,
would like to?
yeah. I was going to say, as part of the normal governance, I think it's important to have these recurrent meetings where you have obviously your sponsor from the local perspective, but also you the global perspective coming together. So depending on how long is the project, but I do think there are some moments or milestones that you want to showcase where you're at, share the responses, share, like we've been doing a lot of surveys, for example, of monitoring how the team is feeling, but also the champions, and sharing that back with not just your local sponsor, but your global sponsor, so they see what we're doing and how people are doing. So there's no surprises, and we're all aligned on the approach locally, and what that means also from a global perspective. So again, goes back to what Laurent was saying about transparency and constant communication between global and the local, because I think when there's some clashes because there's too much time in between discussions, perhaps, and they're not following what we're doing, and then there's that surprise. So you don't want to have any surprises. You want them to be clearly aware of where we're at, what we're doing, and invite them along the journey. Similarly, you do change management both ways, I guess. But yeah, I think it should be part of your plan and that piece about governance.
That's really good. And so, have you guys ever experienced challenges when local and global meet? Are there any stories you can tell? You know, anything that we can learn from your immense experience?
Do you
I
want me
know
to start,
Go ahead, please be my guest.
There's been a lot of challenges, obviously. I've been lucky when I've been working with Laurent, because it was so much there to help us, really caring about what's going on in the markets and giving us the right tools and the support and the link between the markets to learn from each other. But it's not always the case. And I would say that the tension comes probably much more between the global project management, because they have very clear deadlines and budget that they have to follow from a global perspective. And when the locals say, actually, this is not quite right, we're not there yet, we want to wait, or we want to do different things, we get that pressure from a global perspective that they believe we're at that stage. And who's going to pay for those delays? And that's where you have, that's the clash. So again, goes back to what I was saying before, having them along the journey and being very, very much working as one team, and understanding very clear on the challenges and how we're going to solve them together versus global against local and fighting for these different milestones and timelines. I think this is when it gets a bit negative and difficult.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
tricky.
as a build, I think there's often a tendency to try to drive everything towards standardization. Okay. Experience tells us slightly otherwise. So in my role, I also try to play the both good cop and bad cop, but also having a clear understanding where there is actually a valid reason for some level of localization, depending on the nature of the market, depending on the way they may be dealing with their retailers or their customers, for example. That actually does require a level of localization when you do change to make sure that they are successful. So it's also important to, I would say, feed this back as well into those global project teams and ensure that some of those nuances are taken into consideration.
100%. 100%. Do you guys generally do pilots as well in your global rollouts? Pilot, like a test, yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's often a number of markets that tend to go first. And as always, very valuable lessons to be taken and most importantly shared with other markets. I think with Mariebelle, we've also tried as much as possible to take as well a bit more of a regional approach at times where markets may be going slightly after another and ensuring that we can connect those dots. Too often in those large programs or large organizations, markets may have a tendency to work a bit too much in silos. So it's also very important to help them connect the dots, understand that someone has been on that journey 6 months ahead, and they can actually very openly share those learnings so they can speed up the time.
Yeah.
I have to say that ANZ is often the pilot country because it's small. And if you look at Europe or US, where it's sort of a similar culture or similar landscape or retail landscape, ANZ is very small, is a very low risk, but at the same time, similar landscape. So often used as a pilot. So I've gone through a lot of those pilots myself, being like, again, we're the first, and being kind of scared of others versus giving learnings. But I've gone a lot into that actually I was the first. So I was just really taking it and just building from scratch some of those. To be fair, like I think the project I worked on with Laurent, there were a few other, there were I think 2 or 3 countries that had gone before us. But again, we were quite different. So there's a lot of things for us to build as well.
Oh, that's super cool. I didn't know New Zealand was the country of pilots. Now I do.
And in Australia, both of them. We often bundle them together.
Yeah. Super good. Yeah. Are there any other clashes or opportunities when global and local meet?
I think from an opportunity standpoint is to help speed up the scaling. Okay, so again, bringing some markets together, which could be a bit more culturally closer to each other, operationally closer to each other. There are some wins there. So I think as well as a global role, it's very important to identify these very, very quickly and actually share them and ensure that there is traction as quickly as possible. So there are always opportunities, and equally, like we discussed a little bit earlier, making sure that there is visibility and lifting up the good examples that are happening. If it is a successful pilot, people need to know about it. So it's very important to have a very clear communication around it, making sure people also do get recognized through that process, and that it is being leveraged to the greater good of a business.
Yeah.
I would say the
100%.
same. So similar from my experience. Even if I was sharing always bits and pieces along the way, when I finished a project, normally you move on to the next thing. But especially the last one, I took the time, like I'll just take it, I'll just create this short deck that actually show the whole journey from A to
Mm,
Z. And then that way they could then take it from other countries and it's all there. Like they don't have to search for all these bits and pieces. And it was not part of what I had to do, but I did it because I thought, you know what, I need to leave this sort of legacy, I guess, of the
yeah.
project and give it to other countries. And it was really, really helpful us to hear about it. Like, oh, that deck that was like used by this and this country afterwards. So I didn't realize the impact it would have. So from a local market perspective, I think just taking the time to step back and put your learning together and share it to other countries is so useful. And you just also on the perspective like, oh, it's you get to be known by other people in other countries as well because they recognize what you've done in your work. So that's really nice as well.
That's really good. I don't hear a lot of change practitioners who actually do closure well
Mm.
enough, because at one point your budget is just gone. And so you kind of just let people, go on their own journey with whatever change you've brought to them.
Mhm.
But I really like the fact that you brought closure, in a deck, full deck, summarizing everything.
Mhm.
And I find that the last piece of the change management, which is, reinforcement, sustainability, potentially onboarding, if we're talking about a tool, we generally tend to forget about it. And not because we don't want to do it, but due to budget restrictions.
Mhm.
Yeah, you reach the end and there's no more money in your pocket. So you kind of have to leave it where it is.
But it shares, I think for me, like taking the time to do this was also sharing the importance of change management because then you could see in one go everything that we've provided, how much it meant to the whole project. When actually, when it's just in bits and pieces, or you see an Excel change impact assessment or an Excel, like it's just not giving it your whole story. So it's quite
Yeah,
nice to actually take the time to do this.
love it. Really
Mm.
good. Well done for doing that. All right. Yeah, I think we've covered everything that we wanted to share about, global versus local. We talked about a lot of theory here, but we know that in practice it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of empathy, and a lot of people to get the job done on a global scale. So, well done to Mariebelle and Laurent for your achievements, and I'm pretty sure we'll be hearing about more of what you guys achieved together as you work together. So. Thanks for being here again and sharing your experience.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for
Before
having
we
us.
leave, I don't want you guys to leave without sharing, your ultimate piece of advice to any change practitioner who's listening to this podcast. Yeah, what is one thing you want them to leave with?
I think probably as you built on the last point, I think you need to go past that budget question. Okay, so
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
more a question of legacy and sustainability. How do you want to be remembered? Okay, by the client, by the people you worked with. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think it's really important to ensure that there is sustainability built into your strategy, into your change strategy, and that can take different elements. That can be conversations with HR, for example, on talent management. How do you ensure there is a pipeline of talent coming through to take those roles once the project is finished to actually drive that sustainability forward? Equally, I have noticed sometimes a very clear correlation between the change of leadership and the degradation of a change program. How do you build this as part of the onboarding program for a leader? Which I have seen in the market in the Philippines, where
mm,
clearly an organization had worked very hard in the way they were running their business. This was a non negotiable. They literally sat down with the new CEO to tell him, quite frankly, this is a non negotiable. So there are ways of actually doing this to making sure that sustainability actually is inbuilt.
that's a really good piece of advice. Yeah, and you, Maribel?
Well, it's very similar to what Laurent said. Part of what I said about the creating your deck, that closure, making sure that people understand change management. I think it's been a very much part of my journey to teach change management along the way. So every time I was doing a piece of work, I tried to just teach what exactly what that means, why I'm doing this. and then have a few people in the business that can take it on and understand it a bit better. So I've done actually along the way a few lunch and learn about change management. And I would take the project manager and we'll share together what's the difference between project management and change management. So people in the business were really interested in understanding what that is, and working very closely with the project manager, making sure that change has its place and we working together in unison. And when we do the governance, there's the project and the milestones, and there's where we stand with the people and how we are in that journey of change with our people. So so that would be my take.
Really good. Really good. Thank you so much for your contribution and for sharing your experience here on the podcast. One very last question. Who should I have next on the podcast?
I would recommend Jess Darrell. So she's I'm part of our community of practice as well in change management. You can follow her on LinkedIn. She has a lot of great content. Many, I think 30 years of experience. She has a PhD in change management. So seriously, she's the epiphany of change management. So highly recommend if you can have her on the podcast.
Okay, I'll reach out to her. Thank you so much. Thanks again. Thank you for our listeners for joining here on this 7th episode. And stay tuned for our next episode coming up very soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.